I'll begin this afternoon's session with a brief introduction. Welcome to the Canadian Institute of Forestry's National Electronic Lecture Program. My name is Sharon Yan, and I will be hosting today's session. Today is Thursday, June 6, 2024, and this is the first session in the e-lecture series entitled Equity in Canada's Urban Forests. How can we engage people in urban conservation where they live? The series is brought to you by Tree Canada. The CIF-IFC is very pleased to collaborate with Adrina Bardakjian and the team at Tree Canada to host these webinars. Today's webinar is titled Education and Engagement to Inspire Low Carbon Resilience in Canadian Cities. A special reminder that ISA-certified arborists are eligible to receive one continuing education unit for this webinar. Please email electures@cififc.org with your full name and ISA-certified ID in order to obtain the ISA continuing education unit. Today, we have Adrina Bardakjian, Director of Research and Engagement from Tree Canada. Dr. Bardakjian has worked in the field of urban forestry for 20 years in both research and practice. In her role with Tree Canada, she leads the development of multiple research collaborations and professional engagement initiatives, such as the Canadian Urban Forest Network and the Canadian Urban Forest Conference. With that, I will now pass it over to Adrina.
Thank you, Sharon, and the CIF for hosting this series, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Equity in urban forestry is the theme of our upcoming Canadian Urban Forest Conference this October in Winnipeg, as many of you may know. And over the coming weeks, we're exploring various concepts of both social and ecological equity as they relate to urban forestry in both research and practice. And in the interest of profiling important topics and initiatives of people where they live, we really wanted to focus this series on engagement. And so I'm pleased to introduce our three speakers today from the University of British Columbia. Dr. Sara Barron is a lecturer and director of the University of British Columbia's Urban Forestry Programs. She is passionate about urban forestry education, as well as exploring the connections between human well-being and exposure to urban forests. Dr. Sheppard is Professor Emeritus at UBC's Collaborative for Advanced Landscape Planning, also known as CALP, and founding director of UBC's Urban Forestry Program, now focusing on community engagement on local climate solutions through visual learning tools and practitioner training programs. And Elisa Kwun assists Dr. Barron as a coordinator in the Master of Urban Forestry Leadership Program and as a research scientist at CALP. So thank you all for being here with us today and sharing your experiences and insights. We're really looking forward to this presentation. Please go ahead.
Okay, and I just want to thank you, Sharon and the Canadian Institute of Forestry and Adrina and Tree Canada for this opportunity to talk about education and engagement across the spectrum of opportunities that exist in Canada and that we believe should be scaled up across our Canadian cities. We are fortunate, and we would like to acknowledge that the lands on which we work and learn are the traditional unceded and occupied territory of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam peoples, and we're speaking to you from this beautiful place right now. To begin, we'd just like to share some of the key learning objectives and takeaways that we hope you'll gain from listening to this webinar and engaging in conversation once the presentation is over. We always aim to support capacity building for practitioners and communities in ways to integrate climate solutions into existing urban forestry practices and our community engagement practices. There's three key sort of takeaways that we hope you get. And one is to think about the spectrum of new educational pathways that exist and are possible into the future for practitioners to build capacity and credentials in urban forestry and community engagement, to learn how to apply powerful, cool tools for engaging residents in tree planting and stewardship in both public and private land, and finally, to help mobilize communities for low carbon resilience We'll share a case study from a British Columbia community that built local capacity and empowered collective action in vulnerable neighborhoods. I'm going to begin the talk with my passion area, which is urban forestry education. Urban forestry, I argue, is emerging as a discipline now. It's really grown in the past 10 years since we've launched the Bachelor of Urban Forestry program. And recently, a collective group of international educators got together to discuss just this topic. And we came up with this sort of statement, and there's a paper forthcoming arguing that urban forestry is really emerging as a nimble, flexible, transdisciplinary, and very socially focused discipline that has very strong roots in tree and forest science. And I hope you agree that this is the case. It's also an emerging profession. There's been a lot of work discussing how we brand ourselves as urban foresters. And very recently, there's been some exciting opportunities in this space. The Society of American Forests just launched an urban and community forestry certification scheme, where those who are practicing in urban forestry and have been educated in urban forestry or some combination of the two are able to sit the exam and undertake the training to call themselves a professional urban forester. And that's been very exciting to watch and support as it's been developed. Last year, the Sustainable Forests Initiative launched their urban and community forestry certification scheme, which is growing across Canada and is a very great program for helping us really cement what is urban forestry and why it's important in our world today. And we know that the International Society of Arboriculture, in partnership with the Urban and Community Forestry Society, is revising their municipal forestry credential with thinking about what that means for the profession of urban forestry. So there's all of this exciting movement in this space. I can't help but be excited about the Growing Canada's Community Canopies GCCC project, part of the federal 2 Billion Trees program, $291 initiative across Canada to enhance urban green spaces and create over 2,000 jobs annually. And I'm excited about that because as we graduate passionate urban forestry students, it's nice to know that there's going to be job creation in this space moving forward. And last year, the United States government launched a program with over $1 billion in grants for increasing access to urban forests in American cities. This is a significant amount of funding, an exciting amount of funding. But I worry sometimes about the learning opportunities that could be attached to this. And before I get started in talking about that, I just want to make sure that I communicate that this is a spectrum of learning opportunities. I'm not talking about just a traditional fourth year degree, but I'm talking about how we educate in urban forestry at high schools, how we might have micro certificates and professional training opportunities, the important diplomas that exist across Canada to train urban forestry professionals. I'll talk a little bit about our degree programs and postgraduate degrees, but really important in all of this is focusing our work on community engagement and extension, giving opportunities for the people living in our cities to learn and understand and grow what urban forests can do for the places that we live. I want to give a shout out to the Project Learning Tree program because they're doing really important work in educating youth in this space. Here's just a quick slideshow from their website, but I suggest you spend some time if you can within this website because there's amazing learning opportunities there to be found. Another shout out to Vibrant Cities Lab, which has this really great career pathways action guide. It is mostly focused in the United States, but it's got some great information about urban forestry jobs training. And I would really love to make a Canadian version of this into the future because there's so much work to be done in this space, and training and bringing people into this job opportunity is a real passion of mine and is ours as a collective at UBC. But there's also been some recent work talking about urban forestry jobs and this sort of broken ladder of, the career ladder of urban forestry, and how the entry-level jobs aren't necessarily, there isn't this necessary stepping stone of entry-level jobs that build into a career pathway in urban forestry. And there's been a lot of discussion since this really important paper came out to start to figure out how we can secure that entry-level job through education, through sort of cooperative programs, internships, to ensure that a career in urban forestry is additive and is important and is something that people can aspire to do and build throughout their lifetime. This is a list that we've found. I'm sorry if it's incomplete. There's a lot of great programs out there, and if you do have one that we've missed, please let us know so we can continue to add to this list. So we know that Fleming College was doing a fantastic job of educating urban forestry technicians. That program's on a bit of a pause right now, which is causing a lot of, I think, distress in our whole community because it was such a powerful program. We know the University of New Brunswick, with their Bachelor of Forestry and Environmental Management, is providing fantastic education in this space. University of Toronto, with their master's degree, Humber College, Olds College, Algonquin College, are all providing really high quality education in the space of urban forestry. So it's not just UBC. We're proud to be part of this collective of educators. And I think personally, we need to continue to expand this so that more students have opportunities to learn in this space. And as part of this work, and our contribution to this is to help sort of build a discipline. So we convened this group of international educators last year just to discuss exactly how we educate in urban forestry across the spectrum of educational pathways, and to build some shared curricular outcomes for international urban forestry programs, so that when someone graduates with a degree in urban forestry, it's crystal clear what their skills are, what the knowledge domains that they've accomplished are. And we'd like to continue this conversation, particularly to advance teaching and learning in this space for future urban foresters. It's a complicated, holistic, interdisciplinary discipline, which is a bit of a conundrum. There's so much to do and learn, especially when we're talking about working with people in community, as well as the science of tree and forest management. So there's still much work to do to share best practice. I think it was interesting through the survey that we did as part of this symposium to understand where a lot of the people were coming from. And I hope you use this as an opportunity to think through who was at that symposium. You can see primarily they were teaching in higher education, bachelor degree and postgraduate degrees. We need to widen the net and the circle in future symposiums to include a broader spectrum of learning opportunities. But this gives a sense and a flavor to who was responding to the survey when you see the upcoming slides. So urban forestry, as I said earlier, is holistic, complex, and there's a lot of stuff that we need to know to be a successful urban forester. And so this was the first sort of brain dump of urban forestry knowledge domains and competencies that the participants shared. And they've been sorted by number of responses. I like to point out, and Stephen's keen for me to point out, community engagement is very high up on that list and the sort of competencies that an urban forester would need. But it's true, we need to know a lot of stuff, and there is danger of spreading too wide. And so we created this list, and then we did a follow-up survey to rank the highly ranked ones. So this is the second round of the survey that really focused in on the top 5 knowledge domains, technical competencies, and generic competencies that a successful urban forestry graduate should have. Now, I should say very clearly right now, this is a draft list for a paper that's in preparation right now. We haven't spent a lot of time going through it in complete detail, but I'm happy to share this as a starting point for a long-term conversation about urban forestry education. And I hope many of you agree with this ranked list of domains and competencies. So I am going to take this opportunity to share some things that we're doing at UBC that might be of interest to those on the webinar. So we've created some new learning pathways for building capacity and credentials in urban forestry and engagement. We've got 2 degree programs, and we've also got an extension or training course, a micro certificate in climate action and community engagement, which Stephen will talk about shortly. The Bachelor of Urban Forestry program launched in 2015, and next year we'll celebrate our 10th year, which I'm really excited about that party, and really celebrating where our alumni have gone, what they're doing in the world, and how we're helping the profession of urban forestry by training compassionate students in this space. It's a relatively traditional 4-year undergraduate degree. Students have opportunities to focus in landscape and recreation planning or urban green space management. That urban green space management minor is now accredited with the Canadian Forestry Accreditation Board. We have co-op programs for students to build their job skills throughout their degree if they choose to participate in the program. It's a really holistic education, and I think Stephen can jump in here, but I remember sitting around the table planning this and ensuring that it was as holistic as it could be, but giving enough depth for students to come out with the skills they would need. So core subjects that we teach include urban ecology and management, green space planning and design, recreation and well-being, and climate change and sustainability. Some photos that I'm quite proud of. The top one might seem like a boring photo to you, but this was one of the happier moments that I had 2 years ago when our first cohort of Master of Urban Forestry Leadership students came out and mentored our undergraduate students at our annual field camp for 3rd-year students. And they continue to come and share their expertise with our students, and building this cohort of really collegial, cooperative urban foresters is a real passion of ours, and seeing it come together for the first time was really exciting. And the bottom photo is liaising with industry. Bartlett gave us amazing demonstrations last year of some of the tools and techniques that they use out on the field. And this is just a photo commemorating that day of learning out around our building. We're also really proud to have launched the Master of Urban Forestry Leadership Program only 3 years ago. This is a really unique program to develop leaders in the field of urban forestry and build cohorts of skilled urban forestry professionals. I see some of you in the participant list on this call. Thank you for joining. We're trying to expand international networks so students can join online from wherever they are. And we're finding that this is attracting real leaders in the field who might be working at the time, who might have caring responsibilities that keep them in a place. They can come and learn virtually at UBC. Over 25 months, we've moved it to a fully part-time program, recognizing that many people were working while taking the program. It's fully online. About half of it is asynchronous, meaning you can do it at your own pace, and the other is really focused on deep discussion about the topics that we need to discuss in urban forestry. Of course, education is about being together and that social connections that we form. And so to complement the online program, we have 1 week of field experience in Europe. Here's photos from the last 2, standing in Bosco Verticale at the bottom, learning from the architects of the successes and challenges of that particular monument to urban forestry in Milan. And then standing in Utrecht with Cecil Kniesendijk, learning about urban forestry issues in the Netherlands with a group of students. And then we get together to celebrate our learnings in August at UBC. It's really designed for professionals interested in advancing their urban forestry career or those moving into urban forestry. So we've had professionals from really disparate fields come in and just learn how to bring their skills into urban forestry. And it's been quite amazing to watch. There's 7 courses, and then each student gets to do a capstone research project, really focusing in on something that they're interested in. If you want more information, we've got some testimonials from students and such on our website. And now I'm going to pass it over to Stephen to share a little bit about our extension program. So Stephen, do you mind unmuting and sharing about this program? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Excuse me. Yeah, so this is just to sort of complete that spectrum of at least of the slides that we have today about these different levels. And one of the gaps that I think we've recognized in a number of fields as things like climate change and resilience become more important are these sort of micro certificates, small online credit programs that go in depth into certain topics. And one of the first ones we developed was this sort of this what we call the climate and community engagement, or CASE, climate action and community engagement micro certificate, because there is a sort of a gap in terms of how do people get real applied best practices on engaging. A lot of urban foresters say, you know, I love trees, that's why I came into this, but I got to deal with people all the time. And this is one way to do it, particularly at a local scale. If you can, next slide, please, Sarah. The next click. Yeah, if you can go back one. Yeah, just one click. So we think of this as a train the trainer program. In other words, helping professionals and community leaders learn how to, if you like, train or build capacity in a community at a local level. This is a part-time online class for working professionals and community volunteers, etc. It's part-time, it's a few hours a week, over about 8 weeks. And with some live coffee hour sort of synchronous connections for questions and sharing projects. And I believe we might have 1 or 2 former alumni, John Kozak, I think, is on, who I think took some of this course. And the idea is to give some very practical skills, but drawing on both research and practice elsewhere on ways to engage communities on climate and urban forestry specifically. And we use the toolkit, which we'll talk about in a minute, as some of the tools that they can learn. But it really ends up with crafting the students take, the learners take their own community and craft an engagement plan as part of the product. Next slide, please, Sarah. And so we've gone for 3 years. We're starting up the new one in October, the next one in October of this year. And about 2/3 of the folks are from municipalities or consulting, private sector. But we also have quite a few NGOs, community leaders, and just interested people that want to learn more about how do we engage people on urban forestry and climate change. We've had good response, good recommendations coming out of it. Participants seem to be able to apply it directly. As a nice testimonial here from Alistair, who was one of the early ones in the city of Kingston, in applying it. So if you're interested in that, please, come back to us and ask more questions, and we'll provide the link later. Next slide, please, Sarah. So one of the things that we have developed over time in the CALP Research Lab, with help from many people, but Elisa and Cindy Chang and Sara and others, is this Citizens Toolkit. It's a package. It's a set of tools and exercises, and it's designed to work at the local level, the neighborhood level, really, for communities. It's a kind of a do-it-yourself thing, but it grew out of some of the community-based action research that we've done over the years at CALP, and it includes things like integrating some of the data and the visualizations that we can use to empower and captivate and inform and educate. But now it's going to a very sort of simple, practical, hands-on level. Next slide, please. So it's a PDF package. It's online. We have a mobile-friendly version called iCoolKit. And the idea is it's simple, it's fun, and it's something that citizens can do themselves, but ideally someone is organizing and facilitating in helping administer that. And Elisa will talk a little bit about an example of that. But it's really bringing in some of these best practices and making them very simple and fun for people to learn more about climate change, learn more about urban forestry, and get involved. Next slide, please. So there's a structured process, don't have time to go through it all, but simple, fun exercises in this package, and we'll touch on a couple of those now, and Elisa can say a bit more about them when she gets to a discussion on Oak Bay. Next slide, please. And essentially, it's a series of exercises. Sometimes we do it as 3 workshops. They always involve walking local people through their own neighborhoods and just looking around and getting that experience and trying to think about how does climate change affect us? What do we need to do to be more resilient? What's the role of green infrastructure? And one of the things we do have these exercises like the Urban Forestry Quest. This is just one of many in the guide. But the thing that people seem to remember on these walks, next slide, next click, please, is the squirrels. Yes, I know we all hate squirrels, but what people remember is this thing called the leaping squirrel test. And that's where we ask people just to sort of walk down their block and figure out if a squirrel can get from one end to the other without coming down to the ground. In other words, it's a very, very crude canopy index. And what's amazing is that people have never looked up before. They have no concept of how much canopy have I got? Do I have enough shade? How hot's it going to be in the summer? You know, what do I do about floods and stormwater? And the squirrel is the way to get them to get it. And kids, of course, love it. So we've had a lot of success with those kinds of techniques. Next slide, please. One of the other tools in that process that we found to be very effective, and people of all cultures and all neighborhood types and all ages can do this, and it's draw on a picture of their own future, of their own street. So we just print out 11 by 17 of Street View, or we've done it online in Zoom during COVID. And people come up with these ideas. This is a drawing from some school kids about a local street. And you can see the kinds of things they're coming up with, planting more trees, bike lanes, this kind of stuff. And it gets them thinking about the future as opposed to just assuming it's status quo. One more click, please. And we've had some great responses. We've tested this with schools and communities and neighborhood community centers and this kind of thing. And it does seem to be tangible and eye-opening and important. The process leads to a climate action plan, a collective climate action plan where people get together to try and plan out climate solutions. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand this over to Elisa so she can tell you more about how it works in practice at the community scale. Over to you, Elisa.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. So I'll be presenting about the Toolkit program in Oak Bay. And for those of you who are not familiar with Oak Bay, it is a municipality just east of Victoria, BC, on Vancouver Island. And just for some context, they have just under 20,000 people as their population there. So I'll be introducing an example of how we worked alongside the District of Oak Bay and their community to develop and implement a customized toolkit based on their interests and needs. And this is a 3-year partnership program where we facilitated and ran workshops engaging residents to become climate champions in their neighborhood. Next slide, please. So we had a focus group developed that helped us decide what our goals were for the program and what should be on the toolkit and what we should touch on in these workshops that we ran. We came to the conclusion that we wanted citizens to learn what climate change means at the neighborhood scale, how to craft a climate action plan for their neighborhood, and what skills and tools to use to engage, inspire, and mobilize neighbors on practical climate solutions. The first 2 years of the program, we at CALP assisted with workshop facilitations, outreach, and engagement. And in the third and current year of the program, our role is primarily assisting with advising with engagement of the community groups. And so one of their goals for the program is to hit 40% canopy target by 2024. And that's approximately 170 private trees a year. And we'll talk about where we're at in a bit. So if you could just load the entire slide, Sarah, that'd be great. Perfect. So here's an example of what the Oak Bay workshop process looked like during year 1. So as Stephen mentioned before, sometimes it's a series of 3 workshops, and it could be modified into something shorter as well too. But we really wanted to spend time on all of these really important activities to kind of get them excited about climate change in their neighborhood. So we split the process into 3 workshops where we identified different learning activities that we wanted them to cover. In workshop 1, we looked at what climate change looks like in their city. And we do a walk called a CIMA walk, which stands for Causes, Impacts, Mitigations, and Adaptations, where we're looking for examples of climate change physically in the neighborhood as we're walking around. We end workshop 1 by identifying or mapping areas of possible adaptations that we would want to cover in the later series, or in the later workshop, sorry. This kind of sets the scene by getting citizens engaged and hopefully excited about visioning what their future neighborhoods look like. And then they work together to create an action plan by they create an action plan on how they want to achieve their climate action goals. So from these activities here, groups are being formed naturally, either by interests or by their neighborhoods. And we'll show in a few slides later how they work collectively towards a common goal of what they want to achieve in their neighborhood. Next slide, please. So from this program, we were able to create a network of champions that continue to educate the wider community on climate action. There's a broad representation of champions from this program. We have experienced organizers who are keen to lead activities and initiatives, but we also have neighbors, family members of these champions who are very interested from their actions and participate as well. And we also have a small number of youths that are involved, and we hope to increase that in the coming years as well. And from year 1, we've estimated just a bit over 10% of the blocks engaged. And you can see that in the little black circles indicated in the map on the right. And the yellow dots are just the neighborhoods that we've engaged in year 2. And by year 3, I think we've started to fill up the gaps and we've engaged most of the neighborhoods now. Next slide. So this is an example of Harling Point, and this is a neighborhood in the south end of Oak Bay. And these images here are just examples of how they took the Cool Kit exercises back into their own neighborhood and engaged a bunch of other residents here to participate in these activities. So over 110 other homes participated in this citizen-led design charrette. And together they've identified areas of vulnerability and even mapped opportunities for more trees to be planted. And so I think in year 1 alone, we've planted over 20 trees. And I think a few more have been gone in since then. Next slide. So just a quick overview of the actions of what has happened so far. Champions from Oak Bay have been finding various opportunities to engage the wider community on climate action, from block parties to ice cream socials. There are over 10 climate action plans created with goals varying from tree planting to meadowscaping and traffic calming. And to this date, over 180 trees have gone into the neighborhoods from this program, some of them in private land and some in public land. And these trees were provided by the district for people who participated or are interested in this program. And lastly, there's a continued interest in keeping this momentum going. Community engagement is really important in this neighborhood. So there are monthly educational sessions on various sustainable issues and topics, such as gardening and carbon reduction. And they're very keen to kind of continue this moving forward.
Thank you, Eliza. Excuse me, I skipped ahead. Do you mind if I finish up with this last slide?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I love listening to these stories of moving climate angst and anxiety into action for communities. So thank you, Eliza and Stephen, for leading that Oak Bay example of how a community can be mobilized and empowered to create their own homegrown climate solutions. And if you're interested in learning more, the micro certificate is a great way to get these materials. They're also freely available online for anyone who'd like to bring this type of work into their community or into their own workplace. So to summarize the 3 takeaways on education and engagement for urban forest action, there are multiple education pathways, and we Canadians need to work together to build more opportunities for learners to engage in urban forestry education. There's different levels of training available for practitioners and communities to take part in that exist already. Climate engagement can be an effective entry point to private tree planting and vice versa. So there's an inherent relationship between climate adaptation and urban forestry that can be explored and can be very empowering for people. And there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Everyone, as I said, just now is welcome to customize or cherry pick from the cool tools that are available on CALP, the Collaborative for Advanced Landscape Planning's website, which is shown here on the slide. And with that, we'll stop sharing the screen and take some questions from the Q&A, Sharon.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah, Elisa, and Stephen. That was a great presentation. So now let's move on to the questions. While we're waiting for participants to finish typing their questions, let's take a moment to fill out the post-webinar survey. Just one moment. I'm gonna launch it. So there are 2 questions in total. You may need to scroll down to see the second question. All right, so the first question in the Q&A pod is, what kind of income can a certified urban forestry professional expect to earn, especially those who are entry level?
That's a tricky question. No one is a certified professional yet. I think the first exam just happened. I think the spectrum of income across urban forestry is something to be explored. Entry-level jobs can start out at pretty low salaries, but they can quickly move up to you know, I don't want to throw numbers out there because it is a very broad spectrum from entry level to end of career development, and it varies in the cities across our towns. So I'm sorry I have waffled on that response, but the incomes definitely do vary by experience, like any other career. And we'll see what happens with the professional credential with the Society of American Forests and how that helps bolster income. I can only imagine that it will.
Thank you, Sarah. Next question in the Q&A pod. With all the studies showing the importance of soil microbiology and its relationship with trees, there has to be more education on soil biology and the symbiotic relationship of microorganism and fungi have with helping trees to survive. Is anybody looking to increase education on the preservation of this relationship and the reduction of chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides that can harm and even eliminate the relationship trees need with the soils of their habitats?
Shall I take this one as well? Thank you, Mark. This is such an important question. We were just in Stockholm with the Masters of Urban Forestry Leadership students, very dorkily looking in the soil pits of the Stockholm soil methods, thinking about the importance of soil. We've been fortunate to have Dr. Susan Day as a professor at UBC, and so we have built our soil education in this space, but I completely agree that we need to build even more education in this space. So we've expanded our classes ourselves, but encourage others to do this important work, because trees can't survive without healthy soils, and we do need to, where we can, reduce fertilizer and pesticide use. Stephen, I see you've got your microphone off. Do you want to chime in? No?
I will. Sorry, hang on, give me a second. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a soil expert at all, Mark, but I agree with what you said, Sarah. I do think this is part of an important and probably underserved part of urban forestry and sort of the treatment of soils and the understanding and awareness of soils. And we're facing that with some of these policy changes towards, for example, densification of housing, which is going to potentially have a major impact on soil space, root space, health of soils, pervious area, amount of oxygen, amount of compaction, all these kinds of things. So in addition to some of these sort of knowns and unknowns about fungi and microbiology, which does need to be studied more, we need to improve within government at multiple levels and multiple disciplines an understanding of the importance of this stuff, and it's really quite fundamental. And I think we need more attention focused on this and the importance of protecting and nurturing the soil. Otherwise, we're in trouble.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen and Sarah, for answering this question. So moving on to the next one. I live in Nova Scotia, and our town and country has experienced several hurricane, tropical storm, post-tropical storms in the past 2 decades. These events often lead to trees falling and damaged property, which has a tendency to make the average homeowner too scared to plant a tree that might one day fall on their home. Any suggestions on ways to engage these folks who are not necessarily anti-trees nature, but are understandably afraid of the worst case scenario happening?
Sarah, do you want to try that, or I'm happy to speak to it?
I'll just quickly, because I remember arriving in the last Canadian Urban Forestry Conference in Prince Edward Island right after the hurricane. And these conversations were very deep amongst those who were attending the conference. It's not a simple solution like anything in urban forestry. They're very real and understandable fears. And simply saying we should promote the benefits of trees because they outweigh the risks oversimplifies it, but it is part of the equation, is reminding people of what urban forests are bringing to our communities, and then finding ways to engage in less risky tree planting. Not saying that we engage in risky tree planting, but finding ways to make safer, healthier tree planting choices into the future. Stephen, do you want to add to that?
Yes, obviously it's a tough call. to convince people. I mean, we have that problem in Oak Bay, don't we, Eliza, that where people love trees and they've got these wonderful big old Gary oaks, but people still don't want to have big trees, and they're not particularly exposed to tropical storms, at least yet. So I think it's partly an engagement and education process and helping them sort of balance the risks. And I'm not, again, up on the research on this. I know Peter Dunker did an amazing study of one of the early storms on the East Coast and some of the implications. So, you know, the right trees, right place, right soil treatment, possibly right pruning approaches to minimize the risk. Ultimately, if you're in the eye of the storm, probably nothing works. But I think there was this issue of balancing risks, and I think in a space where there isn't much information or experience on that, people tend to assume the worst. And one of the other discussions is that people who are, unless they're pretty young, by the time some of these trees get to be big and potentially dangerous, they will have moved away or be long gone. I'm not sure that's the best argument to use, but it's a fact. So I think it's part of that deeper engagement and capacity building to sort of be able to weigh the risks. How do we get the cooling benefits and the property value benefits and the health benefits of trees without just doing what Sheffield did and taking them all out? They didn't do it because of tropical storms. They did it to save money, supposedly. But I think we have to try and work against the knee-jerk reaction and get probably some better science on how do you minimize those risks from the kinds of storms that we've had, and how geographically broad is the area that really gets the worst damage when it hits. So there's not an easy answer to that one, I don't think, but having more of a discussion about the pros and cons, I think, can only help.
Thank you, Stephen, for sharing your thoughts. Moving on to the next question. With the knowledge and skills required to plan and manage urban forests, which can have major impacts on ecosystems and societal well-being, should urban forestry become a regulated profession in Canada, or do you foresee it becoming one?
Very short and passionate answer is yes, I think it should. And I hope we can work towards it becoming one into the future, but I don't think it's a short journey to get there. I agree with what you said, Terry. I think it should, personally. That's my personal opinion.
Thank you, Sarah. Next question in the Q&A pod. How does the Queen's Commonwealth Canopy Program fit into the UBC Urban Forestry Program?
Sarah, do you know much about that?
I don't know a lot about it, to be honest. I'm sure others in our wonderful faculty do. I don't personally right now. I'm just looking at it, actually.
Yeah. Well, I'm a monarchist, so I should be very interested in that and part of the yeah, I know that there have been some great programs. I'm not aware of it. Love to find out more about it. I've seen things done through the Prince's Trust, for example, that's been very, very supportive of urban forestry moves, and I imagine this is something similar. But I don't honestly know if it's anything related to that. So we've got some homework to do, and to answer the question, it doesn't fit there yet, and I think it probably needs to. So we do, by the way, in the micro certificate, which we call CASE, the Community Climate Action and Community Engagement micro certificate, we do cover a range of programs. I mean, there are many programs that support things like tree planting or ecological restoration or other kinds of climate proofing activities. And so we're very keen to get some of these programs and guidelines and best practices and possibly funding streams, because the implementation is a big part of it. So we'd love to find out more about it, David. So please drop us a line if you've got personal experience with it.
I noticed that David's offered in the chat, so thank you so much. I look forward to this conversation.
All right, so for the next question, The Cool Kit program is wonderful. Thank you for sharing the case study from Oak Bay. As part of the program, do the community members learn about maintenance of the newly planted trees and have supported from the district to do the required maintenance?
Eliza, do you want to take that one, and I can back you up if you like?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it. Excuse me. Great question. We don't directly teach them maintenance skills of these planted trees. However, there are a lot of professionals and experts already in the cohorts, as well as the manager of park services, Chris Hidley, who often offer support and instructions on how to maintain and watch their newly planted trees. It's also a shout out to Chris, the manager. He often also makes time for general citizen questions and often offers support in going to do site visits and stuff like that too. So they've established a really great relationship with each other. And so I think that's one thing that really works well with that community. And those are for the trees that are planted on the private property. So trees that are planted on the public property are, of course, watched and maintained by the district.
Just to add a couple of points, thanks, Eliza. The generic Citizens Cool Kit, which is the stuff that I presented first before we'd customized the thing to Oak Bay, does have a section on tree planting and basics of tree maintenance and resources that you can go to. So it's certainly addressed, and one of the things that we obviously emphasize is, great to have a tree, but if you don't look after it and water it during droughts and dry periods, then obviously, what's the point? And so I think Oak Bay is getting to the stage now where, because a whole bunch of sort of extra trees have gone in, including on private land, they're at this stage right now. And as you said, Eliza, Chris and his team of arborists are doing that. He's just hiring a new junior position, and part of their role is, in part because of this program, to engage the local people and stay in touch with them. And I think that's really the broader goal of the Cool Kit program, is to find ways to have this network of people and keep them moving and keep them feeling supported by the city. So it's very much a partnership. And so far to date, that's been happening. But it absolutely is vital to not just drop off a tree and say, there you go, and I'd put it over there or something. It has to be much more in depth. And that's what we've been seeing with the people that the champions that are sort of picking up these offers of free trees.
Thank you, Stephen and Elisa. Next question is still for Elisa. How was the tree planting resourced after the Cool Kit exercise? Did you get support from the municipal government? Was there a commitment for after planting care?
And then I see Sylvain's response. So we've already answered the second part of the question. But for the first question, the trees are gifted to the participants for free for participating in the Cool Kit program, or if they're interested in participating in the program in any way. And so the district funds for those trees. So they're paying for those trees and the citizens get them for free.
Thank you, Elisa. Next question in the Q&A pod is, how is UBC looking at the coming densification bills coming from the BC government? The squirrels won't get housing. Serious though, there is a few housing will come at the expense of trees and the environment.
To
Sarah, do you want to start that one?
Well, my answer is we're looking at it with a bit of a heavy heart. To be fair, wrapping our heads around it and engaging in dialogue with the province. Not much sort of publicly available to share, but we are engaged in dialogue as a community on how to share opportunities for increased density and increased urban greening. There's no need for a but in that sentence. And so I think we like to share some positive solutions moving forward so that we have the affordable housing that our province so desperately needs, but not at the expense of green space, with properly thought through increases in green space for the residents living in those communities.
Thank you, Sarah. Next question is, I'm curious to know if all cities in Canada have urban forest management plans, or is this optional?
No, not all of them do yet, but the number is growing exponentially. So it's optional. It's good practice to have a management plan for your urban forest, and I think people are increasingly realizing that, and local governments are increasingly funding that. And so that I would love to chart, actually. Maybe someone should do a study. Any of our students who are thinking about capstone projects, chart the growth of urban forest management plans across Canada. It's grown a lot in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sarah, just to jump in. Hi, it's Adrina. To answer that question, we actually do have, as part of our compendium resource on Tree Canada's site, we do have some plans listed linked to certain cities across Canada. It's we're currently updating this resource, so keep that in mind. But I'll share the link in the response to this question. So there is a list there with a brief description, but we also have a project that we've been working on with U of T over the last couple of years, and it's essentially mapping Canada's urban forestry footprint with respect to what are the communities across the country that have urban forest management plans, any kind of policy related to tree protection in some way, or any policies that somehow relate to the management of trees. And then the third being communities across Canada that have some sort of urban forestry department. So we do have a series of interactive maps that are available on the U of T site, and I'll share that link as well. And that is also in the process of being updated.
That's amazing, Adrina. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, that sounds like really, really great resources. And I just would perhaps add one thing, and it connects a little bit back to what I think Carolina was asking about with the densification as just a big threat, as one example. If cities don't have an official strategy, and they're all also a bit all over the map. Some of them don't even have canopy targets, things like that, or neighborhood canopy targets, for example. So there's lots of things that can be done, and you can find great examples, and you can find, cities and districts and towns that don't have anything. And so when a new threat comes along, whether it's climate change or densification, they're starting from almost ground zero. And some of the new research that came out of Dr. Cindy Cheng's research on her PhD here, and she's now at Diamond Head, looking at a range of Canadian cities and their policies, etc. One of the big takeaways that I got from that was that under even those municipalities that have bylaws and tree protection orders and a number of things and urban forest strategies and plans, those policies typically are overrun, and I don't think this is news to many people, by things like rezoning. They're trumped by quote unquote higher levels of planning, and so it's part of a systemic problem across many cities, I think, of underweighting of the values of these things. And I urge you to look at that study because it was quite thorough and cites quite a few cities' sort of specifics of hearing from senior professionals where these weaknesses occur in the policies and the protections. And so these are the kind of things that need to be folded back into stronger protection plans so that you can argue against, building footprints that are too big or, saving root space and things like that.
Thank you, Stephen, for sharing your opinion. I think we answered all the questions in the Q&A pod. Adrina, I think there's a question for you from one of the participants. Sylvian, she's wondering if you mind she reach out to you about the UFMS and data on urban forest capability.
Sure. Please send me an email.
Okay. All right. If there are no more questions, I would like to bring this session to a close. Thank you all for participating in today's webinar session. And once again, thank you very much to Sara, Stephen, and Elisa for the great presentation. Bye, everyone.